Picture this. It's midnight in January 1348, and you're lying in bed inside a massive stone castle. The walls around you are 3 feet thick. There's no central heating, no electric blankets, and the temperature outside is well below freezing. Your breath is forming clouds in the air. Frost is literally growing on the inside of your stone walls, and the wind is howling through gaps in the masonry like a banshee with commitment issues. By all logic, you should be a medieval popsicle by morning. Yet somehow, people not only survived these frozen fortresses, they thrived in them for centuries. So how exactly did our ancestors manage to get a good night's sleep in what were essentially expensive stone refrigerators designed to keep enemies out and, apparently, warmth as well? Today we're uncovering the ingenious, bizarre, and sometimes downright brilliant methods medieval people used to turn their icy castles into surprisingly cozy bedrooms. And trust me, some of these techniques are so clever, you might want to try them yourself, though I can't guarantee your neighbors will understand why you're suddenly obsessed with sheep. Before we dive into the solutions, let's establish just how brutal the problem actually was, because Hollywood has been lying to you about medieval comfort levels for decades. Those romantic stone castles you see in movies, with their soaring ceilings and massive windows, they were essentially human-sized walk-in freezers for half the year. We're talking about indoor temperatures that regularly plummeted to just barely above freezing, and that's on a good night. Archaeological evidence from castle ruins shows that ice would form on the interior walls during winter, and morning routines literally involved breaking ice off water basins just to wash your face. The massive stone construction that made castles nearly impregnable against enemy attacks also made them incredibly efficient at conducting cold from the outside in and sucking any warmth right out of the interior spaces. Those thick walls that could withstand siege engines? They were also fantastic at storing cold and releasing it slowly throughout the night, like the world's most expensive and inconvenient air conditioning system. Yet despite these seemingly impossible conditions, medieval people didn't just survive. They built thriving communities inside these frozen fortresses and somehow managed to get enough sleep to function, fight wars, raise families, and create some of the most impressive architectural achievements in human history. Here's where everything you think you know about medieval sleeping arrangements gets turned upside down, because the secret wasn't fighting the cold, it was embracing the power of medieval teamwork. The vast majority of people in medieval castles, from lowly servants to visiting knights, didn't sleep in private bedchambers at all. Instead, they participated in what was essentially the world's longest-running sleepover party in the Great Hall. Picture the largest room in the castle, often big enough to hold hundreds of people, with a massive fire pit blazing right in the center. Not a fireplace with a chimney, mind you, but an open fire with smoke drifting up through a hole in the roof like nature's own central heating system. When night fell, people would unroll sleeping mats, furs, and makeshift bedding in concentric circles around this fire, creating a human heat-sharing network that was surprisingly effective. The combination of body heat from dozens or even hundreds of people, plus the radiant warmth from the central fire, could keep the Great Hall at a relatively comfortable temperature even when the rest of the castle was frozen solid. This wasn't just about warmth either. Sleeping together provided safety in numbers, social bonding, and a communal experience that reinforced the tight-knit nature of castle communities. It was like camping, but with more fleas, better security, and significantly more snoring from people you couldn't escape from. As medieval society became more sophisticated and privacy became a luxury worth literally dying for, wealthy nobles began demanding their own private sleeping quarters, which created an entirely new set of challenges that required some seriously creative problem-solving. Private bedchambers were status symbols that said, "I'm so important, I can afford to risk freezing to death alone rather than sleeping with the peasants." But they also isolated people from the communal heat sources that kept everyone else alive. The solution was the medieval bed, and I'm not talking about some simple wooden frame with a mattress. These were engineering marvels that would make modern furniture designers weep with envy. Medieval beds were massive, enclosed structures that functioned like personal warming chambers, featuring heavy wooden frames that could be completely surrounded by thick curtains or even solid wooden panels that created a microclimate around the sleeper. These bed curtains weren't just for privacy. They were survival equipment that trapped body heat and created a warm pocket of air that could stay comfortable even when the bedroom temperature was approaching freezing. The beds themselves were elevated high off the cold stone floors and piled with layers upon layers of furs, wool blankets, and down-filled coverlets that created insulation systems so effective that people could actually overheat inside them, even on the coldest nights. Some of the most elaborate medieval beds were practically rooms within rooms, complete with storage compartments, reading nooks, and enough space for multiple people to sleep comfortably while staying completely enclosed in their warm cocoon. Medieval people didn't just rely on blankets and hope for the best. They developed a whole arsenal of warming technologies that were so effective. Some of them are still used today by people who know what they're doing. The bed warmer, a long-handled metal pan filled with hot coals, was the medieval equivalent of preheating your bed, and servants would spend the evenings sliding these devices between sheets and undercovers to create pockets of warmth that could last for hours. But the real game changer was the warming stone, smooth river rocks that were heated by fires throughout the day and then wrapped in cloth and placed at the foot of beds like medieval hot water bottles that never leaked and retained heat all night long. Some castles had elaborate systems of heated stones that were rotated throughout the night, with servants maintaining a supply of hot rocks near the fire and swapping out cooled stones for fresh warm ones in a medieval version of room service that probably saved thousands of lives. The truly wealthy had warming pans made of brass or copper that could be filled with hot water or heated sand, creating portable heat sources that could be moved around the bed as needed throughout the night. And here's where it gets really clever. Some medieval beds had built-in compartments specifically designed to hold these warming devices, with special slots and chambers that kept the heat sources secure while maximizing their warming efficiency. It was like having a heated mattress, except it required a full-time staff to operate and occasionally caught things on fire. Medieval architects weren't stupid, and as castle design evolved, they developed increasingly sophisticated methods for managing heat that turned these stone fortresses into surprisingly livable spaces. The key breakthrough was the realization that heat rises, so sleeping areas were strategically placed above kitchens, stables, and other heat-generating spaces where the rising warm air could be captured and utilized. Castle bedchambers were often positioned directly above the Great Hall, bakeries, or kitchens, taking advantage of the fact that these rooms maintained fires throughout most of the day and night. Some castles featured elaborate hypocaust systems borrowed from Roman engineering, where hot air from fires was channeled through spaces beneath floors and inside walls, creating a primitive but effective central heating system that could warm entire sections of the castle. Window design was crucial. Two medieval windows weren't just holes in walls, but carefully engineered openings that could be sealed with wooden shutters, oil parchment, or early forms of glass that kept cold air out while still allowing light in during the day. The really advanced castles had double-wall construction in sleeping areas, where an inner wall was built several inches inside the outer defensive wall, creating an insulating air gap that dramatically reduced heat loss. Tapestries weren't just decorative. They were functional insulation that covered cold stone walls and created an additional barrier against heat loss, while also providing a surface that could absorb and slowly release heat from fires and body warmth throughout the night. Some castles even had dedicated warming rooms adjacent to bedchambers where fires could be maintained specifically for heating purposes without the smoke and safety issues of having open flames directly in sleeping areas. Medieval people understood that staying warm wasn't just about heating the room. It was about creating personal insulation systems that could maintain body heat even in challenging conditions, and they developed clothing and bedding technologies that were surprisingly sophisticated. Medieval nightwear wasn't like our modern lightweight pajamas. People slept in layers of wool and linen garments that functioned like wearable sleeping bags, with long underwear, sleeping gowns, caps, and even socks, all designed to trap body heat and prevent heat loss during the night. The wealthy had nightgowns made from imported fabrics like silk and fine wool that provided excellent insulation while being comfortable enough to sleep in, while common people made do with rougher wool garments that were effective but probably itchy enough to keep you awake for reasons entirely unrelated to the cold. Medieval bedding was an art form that involved layering different materials to create insulation systems that could keep people warm in temperatures that would send modern people running for electric heaters. The bottom layer was usually straw or hay contained in fabric ticks that provided insulation from the cold floor or bed frame, followed by wool-stuffed mattresses that added both comfort and warmth. On top of this came layers of linen sheets, wool blankets, fur coverlets, and down-filled quilts that created a graduated insulation system where each layer trapped warm air while wicking away moisture that could make sleepers cold and clammy. The really wealthy had ermine fur blankets and down coverlets filled with feathers from specific types of birds that provided incredible warmth to weight ratios, making it possible to stay warm without being buried under crushing layers of heavy materials. Even pillows were designed for warmth, stuffed with down, wool, or even aromatic herbs that provided both comfort and natural insulation for the head and neck. Medieval people weren't shy about using the most efficient heating system available to other people, and they developed social sleeping arrangements that maximized shared body heat while maintaining appropriate social boundaries. Family members routinely shared beds, not just for space efficiency, but for warmth, with children, parents, and even extended family members sleeping together in large beds that functioned like human heat pools where everyone benefited from everyone else's body temperature. Servants often slept in groups in shared quarters, piling together under communal blankets that created warm microclimates even in the coldest parts of the castle. The practice of bundling, where unmarried couples could share a bed for warmth while remaining clothed and separated by a wooden board, shows how seriously medieval people took the practical benefits of shared body heat, even when social conventions prohibited more intimate arrangements. Some castles had designated warming chambers, where groups of people could gather to share body heat before retreating to their individual sleeping areas once they were thoroughly warmed up. Pets weren't just companions. They were living, breathing heat sources, and medieval people routinely slept with dogs, cats, and even smaller livestock like lambs or goats that provided additional warmth throughout the night. The phrase three-dog night comes from this practice, referring to nights so cold that you needed 3 dogs in your bed to avoid freezing. Even the wealthy, who could afford private bedchambers, often had servants sleep in the same room or in adjacent chambers so that the combined body heat would help keep everyone warm. It wasn't uncommon for noble families to have bed companions, servants whose primary job was literally to help keep their employers warm at night through shared body heat, which was considered a perfectly normal and practical arrangement rather than anything inappropriate. The real surprise is just how innovative and effective these medieval heating solutions actually were, proving that our ancestors were far more clever and resourceful than we often give them credit for in our modern, centrally heated comfort. Some of the techniques medieval people developed for staying warm in castles were so effective that they're still used today by survivalists, campers, and people living off-grid who understand that sometimes the old ways are the best ways. The combination of architectural design, personal insulation, shared heat sources, and warming technologies created sleeping systems that could keep people comfortable in conditions that would challenge even modern heating systems. Archaeological evidence from medieval sites shows that people weren't just surviving these conditions. They were thriving, having children, living to old ages, and creating some of the most impressive cultural and technological achievements in human history, all while getting enough sleep to function at high levels despite living in what we would consider barely habitable conditions. The medieval approach to warmth was holistic, combining multiple strategies rather than relying on a single solution, which made their systems remarkably resilient and effective even when individual components failed. Perhaps most impressively, these methods were sustainable and renewable, using locally available materials and human ingenuity rather than depending on external energy sources that could be disrupted by wars, weather, or economic problems. So the next time you're complaining about your heating bill or adjusting your smart thermostat, remember that medieval people managed to stay warm and get good sleep in literal stone fortresses using nothing but clever engineering, teamwork, and an impressive collection of heated rocks, and strategic sheet placement. These weren't primitive people struggling to survive. They were innovative problem solvers who created comfort and warmth in seemingly impossible conditions through ingenuity that would make modern survival experts jealous. If this medieval ingenuity has got you thinking about historical problem solving, you need to check out our video on how medieval people dealt with the even bigger challenge of staying clean without modern plumbing. Trust me, their solutions were even more creative and definitely more fragrant. And if you enjoyed learning about these surprisingly sophisticated medieval life hacks, smash that subscribe button, because we're diving deep into the clever ways our ancestors solved problems we didn't even know they had, one frozen castle bedroom at a time.